All right, so today I want to talk about the concept of reparations. It's something that's talked about a ton in the States, not as much in Canada, partially because we basically already give the natives reparations. Um, but that's a different story in and of itself. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the state situation, and again, it's probably something that will come up in Canada too, for all we know. But anyway, got a Thomas Sowell quote here, and then I'll talk a little bit about it. And he says, "If you were to give reparations to everyone whose ancestors had been slaves, I suspect that you would have to give reparations to more than half the entire population of the globe. Slavery was not confined to one set of races, and this is the problem with slavery. This is the or sorry, with reparations, it's slavery, and this is one of the big problems with our public school system is that kids get a such a bias and manipulative worldview that it's not even funny. In that you have people that, again, when the first thing they think of when they hear slavery is the blacks in the states, even though slavery happened in the states legally for less than 100 years. I mean, I believe, 1776, the country, I don't know exactly when it was, for sure, but slavery technically existed from the day the government first enforced a slave contract to the day that the Civil War ended, pretty much. At least as far as I'm concerned, the numbers may be a little different there, but as far as legally, uh, legal slavery went, that's basically how long it was. So again, slavery existed for less than 100 years in the States, at least legally. Um, and slavery has existed in other parts of the world for literally thousands. I mean, slavery, like I've made a video about it. Slavery still exists today in at parts of Africa, parts of the Middle East, and yet nobody cares. Nobody cares for some reason. Again, this is one of the things with Black Lives Matter, in that it, until Black Lives Matter acknowledges the negative ramifications on blacks from the welfare state, and until they acknowledge the massive amount of slaves that still exist today, many of them being black, I'm not going to take them seriously. Like, I literally don't care. They're all up in arms about the literal 9 people that were killed last year, that, unarmed blacks that were killed at the hands of police officers. But yet they're not worried about the millions of blacks that still are in slavery. They're not worried about the millions of blacks that still suffer because of the welfare state. Objectively, you're walking over a massive pile of bodies to deal with a handful of bodies. Until they acknowledge that, I'm not going to take them seriously, like, not even close. Um, and they never will. They never will, because they're more worried about Marxism and communism than they are about actual justice. But as far as reparations go, yeah, this is the problem, that slavery was not confined to one set of races, and this is a problem that I bet you pretty much everybody can go back, will would have an ancestor that was a slave. I almost guarantee that almost everybody can trace that back. So that's the problem with reparations, is that how do you know? And this is the problem. Another problem with reparations too is that um, what about the blacks that came over after slavery? What about the blacks that weren't their ancestors weren't slaves, because not all of them were. What about this is, like I say, this is the problem. Again, how do you differentiate from that? And again, a lot of people, it's probably pretty hard to prove that you had ancestors that were slaves. I mean, some people probably can, but again, how do you, the barrier to entry is so low here that it's almost no way of proving one way or the other. My guess is that the push would be, oh, if you're black, therefore you get reparations. That's probably what I think they'll be, because they don't want to differentiate between people that actually were and actually weren't. And because of that, again, it just kind of disproves their whole theory, one and of the other. And the other thing too is that the left constantly argues about, oh well, it's a little bit of a different topic, but again, they think that 10 generations later, people are still suffering ramifications and still need to be held responsible for stuff that their great 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 grandfather and grandparents did. But yet the illegal immigrants that bring their kids over the border illegally, those kids aren't responsible for stuff their parents literally did. So again, if you did something wrong 10 generations ago, you're responsible for that. But if you did something one generation, difference, you're not responsible for that. And the other problem with illegal immigration is that, at least the thing that thoroughly debunks that whole idea is you don't get to keep the fruits of a crime. Again, if you go rob a bank, give the money to your kids, you get caught, the kids don't get to keep the money. That's not how laws and rule of law works. So again, if you cross the border illegally and you get caught, you don't get to stay, regardless of whether or not you brought your kids or not. And as far as immigration goes, I think it would be nice to be able to let. The problem with the left is that they fundamentally believe in anybody who wants to come should be able to let in. They'll constantly tell you they don't believe in open borders, but objectively they believe in open borders. They don't believe in the concept of a border wall. They don't believe in the concept of um, any sort of immigration restrictions. They believe anybody should be able to come in, which is basically the definition of open borders. So that's the problem with it as far as that goes. But getting back to the whole reparations thing, it makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense for the simple reason too that if we're going to have reparations, then pretty well everyone should have reparations because again, more whites were enslaved throughout history than blacks, at least from what I'm aware of. A ton of blacks, far more blacks, were enslaved in the Middle East. The reason why people don't talk about that is that they would castrate the men. So, and I mean, they would largely just take men as slaves anyway, which is why there's hardly any blacks in the Middle East because they would make it so you couldn't reproduce. And not to mention, too, a lot of the people would die during that process. I mean, back in the day, they didn't have any way of doing that without killing you, basically. So a lot of the people would flat out just bleed to death or die of an infection. So that's the other problem, too, is that not only did slavery happen on a much larger scale in pretty much the entire rest of the world, it was much more gruesome. It was much more gruesome. I mean, not that this excuse what went on in the states by any shape or in any way, shape, or form, but the slaves in the states were treated far better than the slaves at any other point in history. Any other point in history. They got to keep some of the fruits of their labor. They objectively some of them had a lot of them had decent places to sleep. They weren't abused. I mean, again, because the slave owners wanted to make money off them, so the only way you can make money off them is to treat them decent, right? The problem is that, again, not that it makes it okay. I'm just comparing it to other parts of the world. Other parts of the world, again, these people were castrated again, which means a lot of them died. And the ones that didn't, again, your livelihood is completely gone. You're not to mention too, they were treated objectively, I guess, in a nutshell, they were treated far worse in almost every other part of the world than they were in the States. That's basically the point being. And this is the problem too with slavery is that anybody complaining about slavery, I really don't care what you have to say whatsoever until you acknowledge that again, slavery again, there's still millions of slaves in the world, literally millions, at least that's the estimates. And not only that, a lot of them are black. Not only that, too, a lot of the people buying the slaves are from the Muslim world. Again, so it's a double way of not being able to criticize them. Number two, it's blacks that tend to capture the other blacks and sell them as slaves and a lot of the ones being bought are going to the Middle East or they're people that are Muslim. So again, it's a as far as a do not talk about subject goes with the left, that's probably right up on the list. So that's kind of the problem with reparations is that number one, how do you tell who was a descendant of a slave and who wasn't? How do you prove that it negatively affected them? And if you're going to have that, then pretty well everybody has ancestors that were slaves. So how does it make any sense whatsoever to not to have it that way? Like they'll probably make the argument of, oh well, it was more recent. Well, again, that it was 150 years ago slavery was ended, even more than that. So why do you possibly need reparations for stuff that happened 7 generations ago, roughly? Like, why do you need reparations? It makes no sense. And again, if people need to be held responsible for stuff their ancestors did 150 to 200 years ago, then why in the world are we not holding illegal immigrants responsible for stuff their parents did? Again, this is the problem with the left, is that pretty much every argument they make is full of contradictions. It makes no sense, and a lot of the stuff they don't even believe either. Because if they truly believed in reparations and if they were truly concerned about slavery, they would spend the majority of their time worried about the slavery that's going on in Africa and the Middle East. If they actually cared about slavery, That's what they would be worried about, but they don't. They only care about it when it benefits them politically. Reparations would benefit them politically because it would be a wealth transfer from a largely white conservative population to a largely Democrat or leftist black population. So again, it's just sheerly a political thing. It's just sheerly a political thing. And if we could just be honest about that, at least it would make the conversation easier. But I don't see that happening anytime soon. So anyway, that's kind of what I had as far as that goes. So if you like the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. Check out my PayPal and email, got linked in the description. Again, appreciate any donations, but the very least, just hit that like and subscribe. Check me out on Twitter. Check me out on BitChute. All the links are in the description. Very important that you follow and support people that are speaking the truth. So make sure to check out the links.